In the 8th century, the Umayyad Caliphate stood as a dominant force, its vast empire stretching from the Iberian Peninsula to the edges of Central Asia. For nearly a century, it had ruled the Islamic world, becoming one of history's largest empires. However, beneath this outward grandeur, deep internal divisions threatened its very core. Ethnic tensions simmered between the Arab ruling class and the non-Arab populations, particularly the Persians, who often found themselves marginalized and excluded from power. This unrest slowly eroded the stability of the Umayyad reign. In the midst of this brewing discontent, Marwan II, a former governor of Armenia and Azerbaijan, seized the Umayyad throne. His reign, however, unfolded during one of the empire's most turbulent periods, the Third Fitna, or the Third Muslim Civil War, a time when rebellion and chaos shook the foundations of Umayyad authority. While Marwan struggled to maintain control over Syria and Mesopotamia, a storm was gathering in the east. The Abbasids, a family claiming descent from the Prophet Muhammad's uncle, began to rally support for their cause. Their base of power was in Khorasan, a northeastern province where resentment against the Umayyads had reached a boiling point. The Abbasid revolution was not just a political uprising, it was fueled by a sense of injustice and ethnic grievance, as the Umayyad policies had alienated Persian customs and culture. In 747, Abu Muslim, a brilliant and charismatic general, was sent to ignite the Abbasid cause in Khorasan. Raising the black banner of revolution, he led his forces to a series of decisive victories, ousting Umayyad governors from their strongholds. By 749, the Abbasid army was advancing into Mesopotamia, and the stage was set for a final confrontation. As-Saffah was proclaimed the new caliph in Kufa, signaling the Abbasids' intent to claim the caliphate for themselves. Meanwhile, Marwan, having raised a sizable army, marched from Harran, desperate to stop the Abbasid tide. The two forces, the crumbling Umayyad regime and the rising Abbasid revolutionaries, would soon meet on the banks of the Great Zab River. The fate of the Islamic world now hung in the balance. As dawn broke on the banks of the Great Zab River, two vastly different armies prepared for a confrontation that would decide the future of the Islamic world. On one side, Marwan II, the last caliph of the Umayyad dynasty, had assembled a massive force, nearly 120,000 strong. His army was a testament to the size of his empire, pulling troops from Syria, Mesopotamia, and North Africa. The ranks were filled with a mix of infantry, archers, and heavy cavalry, veterans of countless campaigns. On paper, it was an army built to dominate, a fearsome display of the military might the Umayyads had wielded for decades. But beneath this outward strength, the cracks in the Umayyad regime ran deep. Years of internal strife had taken their toll. Many of Marwan's soldiers lacked loyalty, fighting more out of obligation than conviction. The divisions within his empire, between Arabs and non-Arabs, between loyalists and those dissatisfied with Umayyad rule, bled into the ranks. What Marwan commanded in numbers, he lacked in unity and resolve. On the opposite side stood the Abbasid forces, far smaller but driven by a shared sense of purpose. Led by the charismatic and cunning general Abu Muslim, the Abbasid army was composed of roughly 35,000 to 40,000 men. Many were from Khorasan, seasoned warriors hardened by their earlier victories against the Umayyads. Though outnumbered, they fought with a fiery belief in their cause. They were not just soldiers, they were revolutionaries, determined to bring down a dynasty they viewed as corrupt and illegitimate. The Abbasid army was disciplined, with ranks of spearmen, infantry, archers, and cavalry. Abu Muslim had drilled them relentlessly, preparing them for this very moment. Their unity and purpose contrasted sharply with the fractured Umayyad force. Where Marwan's troops were fighting for a fading empire, Abu Muslim's men were fighting for the promise of a new dawn, their black banners flying high as symbols of revolution. As the two armies faced each other across the field, the stage was set. One side represented the old guard, clinging to power, while the other embodied the forces of change, determined to reshape the future. The rising sun cast long shadows across the battlefield as the tension between the two armies thickened in the cold morning air. Both sides stood poised, waiting for the first move that would ignite one of the most decisive clashes in Islamic history. With a single signal, hostilities erupted. Skirmishers from both armies released a volley of arrows, blackening the sky as thousands of arrows flew overhead. The air was filled with the whistling of projectiles, probing each side's defenses, testing the resolve of their enemies. But the hail of arrows gradually faded, and an eerie silence fell over the battlefield. Abu Muslim, always the tactician, ordered his infantry to advance slightly. The Abbasid spearmen formed an impenetrable line, their shields and spears gleaming under the pale light. The movement was deliberate, a provocation, daring the Umayyad forces to strike first. Marwan II, sensing that the moment had come, unsheathed his sword and bellowed to his troops, "To God we belong, and to him we shall return." With that cry, the charge was on. Thousands of Umayyad cavalry surged forward, a thunderous wall of iron and muscle, galloping toward the Abbasid lines with terrifying speed. To the Abbasid soldiers, the approaching cavalry appeared like a storm, a mountain of men and horses rushing toward them, intent on smashing through their defenses. But Abu Muslim had prepared for this. His troops were trained to face the fury of Marwan's cavalry. As the Umayyad horsemen closed in, the Abbasid soldiers stood firm, their spears braced for the impending impact. And then, the clash. The ground trembled as the two forces met with devastating force. Spears splintered, shields shattered, and the deafening sound of metal on metal filled the air. The initial shock of the cavalry charge almost broke the Abbasid line. Thousands fell on both sides in the opening moments, and for a brief time, it seemed that the sheer momentum of the Umayyad assault might carry the day. Yet Abu Muslim's spearmen, disciplined and steadfast, held their ground. The Abbasid line buckled, but did not break. Slowly, they began to push back, turning the chaos of battle into a grim struggle of attrition. The Umayyad cavalry, unable to break through, began to falter. Many dismounted, choosing to fight on foot as the melee devolved into brutal, close-quarters combat. Sensing the turning point, Abu Muslim issued a decisive command. He ordered his entire army forward, unleashing a coordinated assault that overwhelmed the already fatigued Umayyad forces. The Abbasid soldiers, emboldened by their progress, pressed the attack, forcing the Umayyads to retreat. Panic spread through Marwan's ranks. The Umayyad forces, disorganized and demoralized, began to flee. Their retreat, however, was disastrous. With the Great Zab River at their backs, escape was nearly impossible. Thousands of Marwan's soldiers drowned in the river as they desperately tried to flee the battlefield. By midday, the Abbasids had secured a decisive victory. The battlefield was littered with the fallen, and the once mighty Umayyad army was shattered beyond repair. Abu Muslim's forces stood victorious, their banners flying high above the wreckage of the old regime. The Umayyad Caliphate, weakened by years of internal strife, had fallen. With the Umayyad forces shattered and the last vestiges of their rule crumbling, the once mighty dynasty was now facing the final moments of its reign. Marwan II, the last Umayyad Caliph, fled the battlefield in desperation, hoping to find refuge and rally support in Syria. But the Abbasid pursuit was relentless. Marwan's retreat took him across Syria and into Egypt, but there was no escape. He was eventually caught and executed, marking the end of the Umayyad line. In the wake of their victory, the Abbasids showed no mercy. Determined to eliminate any potential threat to their new rule, they systematically hunted down members of the Umayyad family, eradicating almost the entire dynasty. By April, the Abbasids captured Damascus, the heart of Umayyad power, and this signaled the end of Syrian dominance in the Muslim world. The fall of the Umayyads and the rise of the Abbasids signaled more than just a shift in power. It was the dawn of a new era. The Abbasids moved the capital of the Caliphate to Kufa and later to Baghdad, symbolizing the transfer of power from the Arab elite of the West to the more diverse eastern regions. Under the Abbasids, the Islamic world entered a golden age, marked by cultural, scientific, and intellectual flourishing. Yet, this new reign was not without its own struggles. The Abbasids faced internal divisions, just as the Umayyads had. But for the moment, they stood victorious. The Battle of the Zab had sealed their fate as the new rulers of the Islamic world, and the Umayyad dynasty, after nearly a century of dominance, had come to a dramatic and bloody end.
On this channel, we are putting together narrative historical cinematic battles. Make sure to subscribe and thank you for watching. See you on the next one.